Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the motion that this House has considered the matter of the Cabinet's decision to accelerate preparations for a no-deal outcome to Brexit, following the Prime Minister's failure to allow this House promptly to express its views on the Government's deal in light of the significant public expenditure involved. Mr. Speaker, the background to this debate is well known. This House was due to vote on the Government's deal on the 11th of December. The day before that vote, the Prime Minister pulled the vote, recognising, and I use her words, that she was going to lose the vote by a significant margin, and saying that she wanted more time to secure further assurances on the backstop. Mr. Speaker, I was in the House when the Prime Minister made her statement on the 10th of December, and the majority, in my view, was clearly against deferring the vote. No doubt for that reason, the Prime Minister did not have the courage to put her decision to defer the meaningful vote to a vote, preferring instead for the Government not to move its own business. Mr. Speaker, the problem with the Prime Minister's approach is obvious, and that's, I think, why the majority were against deferring the vote. Firstly, the Prime Minister is highly unlikely to get meaningful changes to the withdrawal agreement. Secondly, unless meaningful changes to the withdrawal agreement are made, the majority in this House are not likely to support the Prime Minister's deal whenever it gets put. That's a point bluntly accepted by the International Trade Secretary, who said recently, and I quote, "It's very difficult to support the deal if we don't get the changes to the backstop. I don't think it will get through." And the first problem about getting changes to meaningful changes to the withdrawal agreement were laid bare last week. After informal talks on Monday and Tuesday of last week between the Prime Minister and other leaders, and then the EU summit on Thursday and Friday, the EU made its position clear. The President of the Commission said, quote, "There is no room whatsoever for renegotiation." The Commission spokesperson said, again in quotes, "The European Council's given the clarifications that were possible at this stage. No further meetings with the EU." And the EU Council also made clear that the withdrawal agreement, again quotes, "is not open for renegotiations." And that's why there have been such strong calls this week for the vote to be put back to this House this week.
On that point.
Yes, I'll give way.
I thank my honourable and learned friend for giving way. And there are many of us, right honourable and honourable members in this House, who are becoming increasingly suspicious that the reason why this Brexit can is being kicked further and further. Does my learned friend agree that that is a disastrous and reckless policy which is not in our national interest?
Hear, hear.
Is to run the clock down and to attempt to present the vote as a binary choice between the Prime Minister's deal or no deal. is passed, it becomes less and less viable. I will give way.
And I'm sure he's going to do this in his speech. I think one of the things that would greatly reassure not just the public, but businesses and some of our public services who are now being forced to spend unnecessarily billions of pounds of money that we best spent on other things, if he could talk through how Parliament will ensure that no deal can't happen.
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention. The first thing I'd say is I really think it's the duty of the government, of the Prime Minister, to stand at this dispatch box and rule out no deal. That is the first thing, and that's the easiest way, because I think the vast majority in the House would agree with it. If they will not do that, then I am absolutely sure that this House will take the first opportunity to express its view, whether that's by way of amendments in January, or whether by its other amendments, or by whatever means. The voice of this House and the majority, who will not countenance no deal, must be heard, and it will be heard. And I've said before, but I say it again, I think deep down that this government and this Prime Minister know jolly well that no deal is not viable. And that calls into question the expenditure that's been announced as additional expenditure, not the only expenditure. I will give way.
Grateful, but wouldn't he accept that there isn't a no deal? There'd be various deals if we leave without signing the withdrawal agreement. So will he welcome the agreement on the Common Transit Convention? Would he welcome the Air Services Agreement? Would he welcome the Facilitation of Trade Agreement? There are going to be plenty of agreements so we can trade perfectly successfully. Would he stop his scaremongering?
Well, I'll come to that point in a minute, but simply listing all the things that need to happen between now and the 29th of March to get to a so-called managed deal only makes the point. It isn't going to happen in the 3 months available. I will give way. I'll give way in a minute.
Does he agree with me that the clock is now ticking and the government needs to seriously start thinking about extending Article 50 so they can send in some decent negotiators to actually either negotiate a deal or put this back to the British people in an election?
I do agree that serious consideration needs to be given to the timetable now set by Article 50, because by the 14th of January, we will be just 9 weeks away from the proposed date of leaving the EU. And on any view, the government will then have to make a choice about what to do next. And no plan B has ever been forthcoming. Before the deferment of the vote last week, in the week or so before, the question everybody was asking is, what is the Prime Minister's plan B? Well, we learned when she pulled the vote and ran away that she doesn't have a plan B. And the Prime Minister will have to come to this dispatch box and make a statement about what she proposes happens next. And if she stands at that dispatch box and says that she intends to take the UK out of the EU without a deal, I genuinely believe Parliament, this House, will do everything it can to stop that course of action. I will give way to my friend here.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. Given that there is the only route that gives legal certainty to be able to stop no deal if the choice is we get to the end and the only thing to do is cancel Article 50, revoke Article 50, can I take it from what he's saying that the official opposition would support that alongside members from the government side?
What I've said is this, that I genuinely think that the majority in this House is against no deal. And one of the reasons I feel strongly that the vote should be put as soon as possible is because the discussion and the debate about what happens next needs to happen sooner rather than later, because it will take time. We need then to assess what the options are and to see where the consensus of the House is. All that's happening in this deferment of weeks of the vote is wasting the time of the House that should be spent on that question, which is how do we prevent leaving without a deal. I will give way and then I will make some progress.
And learned gentleman for giving way, and let me congratulate him on achieving this important debate this afternoon. On the question of extension of Article 50, is he not, like me, hearing from interlocutors in the EU that the EU would be unlikely to grant an extension of the Article 50 period for further negotiation, but they would grant an extension of the Article 50 period for either a general election or a people's vote?
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention, and as the Right Honourable Member knows, I've had a number of discussions with the Commission and the Council and various EU countries about the issue of extension, and the clear message from them is that the only basis for an extension would be if it was coupled with a good reason for the extension. And therefore, again, that is why we need to get on to the debate about what happens if and when this deal is voted down, because these are very serious considerations. I did indicate I'd give way, and then I will give way again.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman. Does he agree with me that it is grotesque and obscene that we have a homelessness crisis in this country, visible right outside this building? We have elderly people not getting the care they need, special needs children not getting proper support, people waiting far too long for mental health support, hospitals full up, all burning injustices. And this Conservative government spends billions of pounds preparing for a no deal, which is not necessary.
I do agree, and I'll be correct if I'm wrong, but I'm given to understand that tragically one of those sleeping just outside the entrance and exit to this place died in the last 24 hours or so, and I think that just underscores the point that's just been made. I will give way.
His words are that it's highly unlikely that there would be meaningful changes to this deal. If that's right, does he agree with me that it's vanishingly unlikely that a completely new deal along the lines that Labour or indeed anyone else might propose would also be agreed by the 29th of March timetable? If that's right, and if it's also right that they wouldn't extend Article 50 to renegotiate a new deal, it effectively means that by not supporting this deal, the Labour Party risks becoming the handmaiden to no deal. And that is a real concern. Does he not agree?
No, I don't accept that. I've had more conversations with people in Brussels than probably most people in this House about the question, a very important question, which is what would the position be if the red lines that the Prime Minister laid down were different? And their position in private is confidential. Their position in public has been repeated over and over again. And they've said if the red lines had been different, a different negotiation could have happened. If the logical conclusion to the Honourable Member's point is that we on these benches must simply support whatever the Prime Minister brings back because no deal is worse, then that is an extraordinary position, because it means that there's no critical analysis, there's no challenge, even if it's the bad deal, the wrong deal for the country, that somehow we have to support it because of this binary choice, and we're not going to do so. I will give way once more.
Thank Honourable Friend for getting me in that point. He's making a very powerful speech about the absurd lack of leadership from the government on this critical issue facing our country. Will he recognise the cross-party letter that was published on Monday, organised by the Honourable Member for Birmingham Erdington, that has confirmed that indeed 19 members of the government benches support ruling out a no-deal option in the national interest? So, in fact, as a matter of mere arithmetic, there is certainly no support for a no-deal crash-out of the European Union option in this House, and it's the duty of this government to come to this House and reflect the wishes of Parliament immediately.
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention, and I agree with it. I'm not sure I'm making a speech. I think I'm responding to interventions. I'll take one more, then I really am going to make some progress.
I take my right honourable friend. Would he agree with me, but it is significant that this morning the new First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, had a meeting with the Prime Minister and told her very, very clearly that she had a moral obligation to make sure that this country did not leave the EU without a deal.
Well, I agree with that intervention. I'm grateful that it's been made. Let me just make some progress. I will take further interventions in a moment. The point I'm really making is this, that leaving the EU on the 29th of March next year without a deal is simply not viable, and I don't think any responsible government would do it. Treasury estimates of a no-deal... I'll give way in just 1 minute. Treasury estimates of a no-deal outcome would mean a 9.3% decline in GDP over 15 years. That would be an act of economic self-harm that no responsible government should take. It would see every region of the UK worse off. It would also mean no common security arrangements in place and, of course, a hard border in Northern Ireland. And in any event, The truth is this: the government simply has not prepared for it, and now it's too late. Let me give two very specific but obvious examples. Over the summer, the previous Brexit Secretary published 106 technical notices. This was the government's view of what needed to be done in order to prepare for no deal. So it came from the government. If you read through those 106 documents, what comes out of it is that, taken together, they commit the government to the creation or expansion of 15 quangos, to further legislation in 51 areas, to the negotiation of 40 new international agreements, either with the EU or with others, and the introduction of 55 new systems and processes. That's the government's own analysis of what it needs to do in order to prepare for no deal. Well, let's just stand back and consider that. The meaningful vote is scheduled for the 14th of January. It's then just over 9 weeks to the 29th of March. It is simply not credible to pretend that even the bare minimum in the government's own technical notices can be delivered in that 9 weeks. The second example is this, and it's just so powerful. 2 weeks ago today, the Chancellor answered a question from the Honourable Member from Dover about preparations at Dover, which we know is a pretty busy port, the busiest. The preparation at Dover. Some of us have been down there a number of times to talk to the staff and the management there about what needs to be done, and they're very worried. But this is what the Chancellor said when he was asked about preparations at Dover. Quotes, "If we were to end up having a WTO-type trading arrangement with the European Union, that would involve some very significant infrastructure works that could not be done in a matter of months. They would take years to complete." Well, there's the Chancellor. However much money you throw at it now, how can you get over that problem? The infrastructure at Dover will take years, not months. It didn't say it would be months if there was more money. It was years, not months. So this idea that somehow we can manage a no deal 9 weeks after meaningful vote only has to be put against that to be seen to be ridiculous. And I will give way in one second. I'll just finish because there's a further point. That was confirmed by the National Audit Office that said bluntly, and this was in October, the government does not have enough time to put in place all of the infrastructure, systems and people required for a fully effective border operation on day one. That was their analysis. I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. Is he aware that I think it was only last week that the non-disclosure agreements, which were stopping officials sharing with business what the government's plans for no deal were lifted to enable businesses to be aware of what the government were planning for in relation to no deal?
I'm grateful for that point, and I think businesses have begun to make their voice in the last day or two about their concerns about a no deal exit. I will give way, as I indicated.
Honourable Gentleman for giving way. On the 6th of December, in Dexu Questions, when we were supposedly still in the middle of the debate, I sought reassurance about the supply of medical radioisotopes, which simply cannot be stockpiled. They have a half-life of hours. I was told to Google what the French government were doing. Well, in Googling radioisotopes and no deal, I have found no reassurance. Does he not agree with me that this pantomime around no deal is frightening patients and doctors and people who run the NHS, and it's a disgrace?
I agree wholeheartedly and thank the Honourable Member for making that point. I think, and of course we don't know, but the reports that at Cabinet there were discussions about medicines being supplied by ferries, again, only has to be said to show why this is not viable. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and indeed we've heard evidence in the Exiting the EU Select Committee that we could see a delay of new medicines coming to the UK of 2 to 3 years if the government proceeds as it intends. But would he agree with me that whilst the cost to businesses is now being talked about far more openly, there's a real cost to our citizens, with the DWP leaked report also suggesting that the government is planning a strategy to deal with potential rising homelessness, poverty and suicide? Isn't this just a horrific place for our country to have reached, and far removed from what people thought they were voting for? Well,
Well, I'm grateful for that intervention. I heard that point being made earlier, I think, as a point of order. And what that underscores is not just the concern about that very issue, but the fact that, in my view, the government should have made a statement today about no deal preparations. It's unsatisfactory that we've had to go through this process even to get a debate. There should have been a statement so that members could then ask specific questions of the government about exactly those sorts of issues. I'm going to make some progress, but I will take other interventions in just a moment. Mr Deputy Speaker, let me also say this. If anyone thinks that the EU are going to ride to the rescue and put in place a raft of reciprocal side deals or waive their rules and laws for the UK, I'd encourage them to actually read the EU's plans for a no deal, which were updated and published just at lunchtime today. On contingency measures, they say this: they will only be taken where strictly necessary and in the interests of the EU. They should not replicate the benefits of membership of the Union, and they can be revoked by the European Union at any time. This is what no deal exit looks like. On information and data exchange, they say work strands are in place, such as the disconnection and adaptation of databases and IT systems and other platforms for communication and information exchange to which the United Kingdom should no longer have access. On air transport, they say UK air carriers will not be able to conduct EU to EU flights. On road haulage, they say a permit system would allow for considerably less traffic than what currently takes place between the Union and the United Kingdom. On goods, all relevant EU legislation on imported goods and exported goods will apply after the 29th of March. That's customs checks, declarations and origin tests. That's a raft of checks on agriculture. That is severe friction. And that comes 9 weeks after the meaningful vote. I will give way.
Honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that it is utterly irresponsible of the Prime Minister to threaten members of Parliament into a deal or a no-deal situation, given what is happening, and given the dangers and risks? And she is playing Russian roulette with people's lives and livelihoods, and she will be responsible for causing chaos in this country if she doesn't rule it out right now before we go into recess.
I agree wholeheartedly with that, and I cannot believe that the analysis that we've undertaken on this side of the House is not the same analysis that has been taken on that side of the House. And they know very well that no deal is not viable. They know very well the risks involved, and that calls into question the decisions that were made yesterday. Mr. Speaker, I will give way.
I'm very generous with your time. Just building upon that point, in coming towards Christmas, I'm sure members across the House will have people coming into their surgery, as I have. The mum and son who lost their job, referred, because of Brexit, referred to the food bank. The dad who came on another issue, breaking down, saying, I'm having counselling, I'm on antidepressants, weeping because of a no-deal Brexit. And he is paying workers, he's worried about their mortgages and their Christmas. When we start worrying about food, stockpiling food, we know surely only the poorest suffer. Yes. They can't afford to stockpile and they can't afford the most expensive food. I'm sure that doesn't happen in the restaurants in Mayfair. But would the honourable member agree with me?
I do agree with that, and I'm sure members across the House have had concerned constituents coming up to them, either in advice surgeries or on buses and trains and in the street, expressing their concern about the state of politics, the place we've got to in these negotiations, and the prospect of no deal. And it's not often that members of the public talk about politics in the way that they're talking about politics at the moment. They're talking about it in a very anxious state because they realise just how badly these negotiations have gone. I'll take one more and then I'll...
I thank my right honourable and learned friend for giving way. I don't think the government is accepting the level of chaos this is going to provide. My Ford factory has 24 deliveries a day of parts. Yep. If one of those lorries doesn't arrive, the factory will have to stop production for a day. That's $500,000 in loss. Zimmer Biomet, who made knee and hip replacements, they send all their products to the Netherlands. They arrive in our hospitals on the day of the surgery. They cannot guarantee that if the lorries are not coming through. There will be chaos in every aspect of life in this country.
For that very powerful point, and it applies, I think, to the whole of manufacturing. One of the things I've done in the last 2 years is to try to visit all of the major manufacturers across the UK and see for myself the systems that they're running. The automobile manufacturing is a classic example of that, where goods are coming in, as we all know, across from the EU all of the time. They are tracked in so that it's known to the hour when they arrive, and in some of the operations, the components are arriving, just to finish this point, 4 hours before they go on the production line, 4 hours before they go on the production line. And that's why any interruption of the current arrangements poses a real threat to manufacturing, and why what's said about Dover not being ready for years, not months, it's very significant for manufacturing. I will give way.
Let a friend give way. I'm extremely grateful to him. He's making an extremely powerful case. Does he share my puzzlement, nay exasperation, that there are some people in government and some on the benches opposite who appear to think that they know more and better about what the implications of no deal would be than the businesses that make things and export things and import things and transport things, who have formed a queue to meet all of us, and no doubt ministers, expressing their concern about what this will mean. And doesn't that show just how irresponsible it is of the government to suggest that this could possibly happen?
I couldn't agree more, and I have myself spoken to hundreds of businesses, either one-on-one or in small groups. I'm not talking about halls full of businesses, but literally one-to-ones, small groups, visiting them across the whole of the UK. And I've not come across any business that has said that no deal could possibly be a satisfactory outcome. And anybody who suggests that businesses in some way would support this approach needs to point to me, please, the businesses they've been talking to, because I've obviously been talking to lots of businesses that they're not talking to, but they are not saying. And in every case, when they lay out their concerns to me, I faithfully ask them whether they have said the same to the government, and I ask them to say the same to me as they say to the government. And on a number of occasions, I have made it my business, in a friendly way, to talk to the Brexit Secretary, to point him to businesses that have talked to me and suggest he has a conversation with them. I am going to just make some progress, because I've given way many, many times. Mr. Speaker, the point really is this, and it comes out through all of the interventions. There's no such thing as a managed no deal. That's why I've repeatedly said a no deal is not credible, it's not viable. It is a political hoax intended only to put pressure on members of this House to back the Prime Minister's deal. Yesterday, instead of trying to find a viable way of getting a deal through the House, the Cabinet agreed to ramp up no deal preparations, notwithstanding all the very valid points that have been made. An additional £2 billion of taxpayers' money has been allocated towards this. That includes £500 million to the Home Office, 400 million to DEFRA and Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and 200 million for the Business Department. That funding would be welcomed by some in the European Research Group. However, look at the reaction of businesses. The biggest customs firm inside Dover told Channel 4 News yesterday that crashing out of Europe without a deal would create Armageddon for the UK. That's business speaking. That's what they said to Channel 4 News. It's not me, it's not anybody in this House. It's businesses who are running Dover telling us what they think the outcome would be. 5 British business groups, including the CBI, said this morning, quote, "It is clear there is simply not enough time to prevent severe dislocation and disruption in just 100 days. The voice of business. No wonder it's reported that there was considerable conflict of views around the Cabinet table. The Justice Secretary is reported to have told the Cabinet that a managed no deal is not a viable option. He apparently added, and I quote, "The responsibility of Cabinet Ministers is not to propagate unicorns, but to slay them." The DWP Secretary is reported to have told the Cabinet that just because you put a seatbelt on, it doesn't mean you crash the car. Mr. Speaker, I agree with them. The first duty of the government is to protect the public. A no-deal Brexit would put the public at risk. It's not scaremongering, it's reality. Mr. Speaker, even if the government did push to did choose to push ahead with a no deal, I'm convinced that Parliament would stand in its way. The overwhelming majority of members in this House would not countenance a no deal Brexit. And I pay tribute to, I think, what is now 3 honourable members opposite, who've already said that they would quit the Conservative Party if the government pressed ahead with no deal. I suspect they're not alone. No government has the right to plunge the country into chaos because of its own failure, and this Parliament won't let it. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I'm not so sure the government grasps the seriousness of this situation, because you've got 800,000 jobs in the automobile industry alone that's at stake here, about 300,000 in the West Midlands. So we've got to get some sort of deal, but not the deal that these are proposing. Will you not agree with me about that?
I do agree with that. And I think at this stage of the negotiations, what should happen is that the deal be put to a vote, the vote taken, and then we have a grown-up conversation about what the real options are, and stop pretending that some sort of managed no deal is the default position. It isn't, and this House will never accept that it's the default position. Mr. Speaker, I will allow. I keep saying.
I'm very grateful. He has said several times, and I understand why he says it, that this House will not allow the government to proceed on the basis of no deal. But one of the difficulties we have, as we've seen over the last fortnight, is that the power of the government in terms of managing the business and completely ignoring any motions that are not legally binding of this House is quite phenomenal. Don't we need to address that business, that inherent problem in our system, if we're really going to have a chance of success?
Well, it's a very powerful point, and I think what the last few weeks have shown are some of the inadequacies in the procedures in this House. The idea the government can simply not move its business and not have to have a vote on that is not acceptable. The fact that we have to have an SO24 debate on an issue of this significance, because we can't force a statement, shows the inadequacies. The only thing I would say just on that point, because it's a very important point, is this: that given that there have to be at least 51 changes to legislation, even on the government's own analysis under the 106 technical notices, there will be opportunities for amendments in this, unless the Prime Minister says, I am simply not going to take any business until April of any sort whatsoever. And I don't think this Prime Minister would do that. I knew her when she was Home Secretary and I was Director of Public Prosecutions. I know how seriously she takes security and counter-terrorism issues. I do not think that this Prime Minister would try to force no deal on this House without the necessary precautions, even on her own case, with legislation. I will give way.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend. Given the experience that we had just over a week ago, what guarantees do we have that the Prime Minister won't, on January the 10th or January 11th, decide that she's got some sign from the European Union that might mean that she'll get a better deal at that point that she hasn't managed to get in the meantime, and then pull the vote yet again?
Well, we have no guarantees because, like everybody else, I think I heard various members of her Cabinet out on the radio on the morning of the 10th of December, assuring all listeners and viewers that the vote was 100% guaranteed for the next day, only for it to be pulled at the last minute. Mr. Speaker, having shadowed 3 Brexit secretaries this year alone, I know as well as anyone that the House has been consumed by Brexit. However, at the end of the year, let's look at where we are. We have a Prime Minister unable to put her deal to the vote and no prospect of further renegotiation. Rather than trying to reach across Parliament to break the deadlock, we have a government that's now actively pursuing a policy that's not supported by the Cabinet, not supported by Parliament and not supported by the country. It is reckless and irresponsible. It's an indictment of a wasted year. Even now, I'd urge the government to take no deal off the table and find a sensible way forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.